He was not a man anyone noticed. Every morning he woke up before the sun. The small alarm on his old phone rang softly, so it would not wake his child. He moved slowly, careful with every step, because the floor made noise if he stepped too hard. Life had taught him to be quiet, to be careful, and to think of others before himself. He lived in a small rented house on the edge of town. The paint on the walls was fading, and the roof leaked when it rained hard. Still, it was home. For him, home was not about comfort. It was about safety. It was about giving his child a place to sleep without fear. After washing his face and making simple breakfast, he woke his child gently. He helped with clothes, packed a small lunch, and listened to stories about school. He smiled, even when he was tired. His child was the reason he kept going. Once the school bus left, he went to work. His job paid little, but it paid enough to survive. Long hours, sore hands, and a tired back were part of his daily life. He never complained. Complaining did not change anything. In the evenings, when the day felt too heavy, he often walked through the woods near his home. The woods were quiet. No noise, no people. Just trees, wind, and the sound of his own steps. Walking there helped him breathe better. It reminded him that the world was still bigger than his problems. That evening started like any other. The sky was turning orange, and the air was cool. He finished work late and picked up his child, made dinner, helped with homework, and listened to sleepy talk before bedtime. When the house finally became quiet, he put on his jacket and stepped outside. The woods were darker than usual. Clouds covered the moon, and the path looked almost black. Still, he walked. He had walked this path many times before. He knew where to step and where to slow down. As he walked deeper, he felt something was different. The air felt heavy. The forest was too quiet, as if even the insects were holding their breath. He stopped and listened. At first, he heard nothing. Then he heard it, a soft sound, very faint, like someone trying not to be heard. He froze. His heart beat faster. He told himself it was just an animal. Maybe the wind. Maybe his tired mind playing tricks on him. He started walking again, but slower now. The sound came again. This time, it was clearer. It sounded like a weak cry. He stopped completely. His breath felt stuck in his chest. The sound did not come from around him. It came from below. He looked at the ground. The path ahead looked disturbed. Leaves were scattered in a strange way. The soil looked darker, like it had been moved recently. He knelt down and placed his hand on the ground. It felt loose. Another sound came. This time, it was a voice. Very weak. Help. His blood turned cold. He pressed his ear closer to the ground. The voice came again, breaking, shaking, almost gone. Please, help me. His mind raced. Someone was under the ground, buried. Fear rushed through him. His first thought was his child. He thought about danger, about traps, about bad people. Everything inside him screamed to run, but his feet did not move. He stood up and looked around. The woods were empty. No lights, no people. Just trees watching silently. He dropped to his knees and started digging. At first, he used his hands. The soil was cold and rough. Dirt went under his nails, cutting into his skin. He did not care. He dug faster, harder. The voice grew louder. I'm here. He spoke back, his voice shaking. He told the person to hold on. He told them they were not alone. Minutes passed. His hands burned. His arms felt weak. The soil was heavy, packed tight. He looked around and found a broken branch. He used it like a tool, pushing, pulling, scraping. His breath came fast and uneven. Sweat ran down his face even in the cold air. His heart pounded like it would break out of his chest. Then his hand hit something hard. Wood. He froze for a second, then dug faster around it. It was a box. A wooden box buried deep in the ground. The voice inside was barely a whisper now. Please, don't stop. He pulled at the wood, breaking it with all the strength he had left. The lid cracked open, and air rushed inside. A woman's face appeared. Her skin was pale. Her eyes were wide with fear. Dirt covered her hair and clothes. She gasped for air like she had been underwater for too long. He reached inside and pulled her out carefully. Her body was shaking badly. She was light, too light, like she had lost all strength. He wrapped his jacket around her and held her close, trying to keep her warm. She clung to him like she was afraid he would disappear. He took out his phone with shaking hands and called for help. The signal was weak, but the call went through. He spoke fast, giving directions as best as he could. While they waited, she tried to speak. Her voice was broken and soft. She thanked him again and again. Tears ran down her face, mixing with dirt. He told her not to talk. He told her help was coming. Sirens finally cut through the silence of the woods. Red and blue lights flashed between the trees. Relief hit him so hard, his legs almost gave out. Medical workers rushed over and took her gently from his arms. They placed her on a stretcher, covering her with blankets. She reached out, grabbing his hand. Her fingers were cold. She looked straight into his eyes, as if trying to remember him forever. Her lips moved, but no sound came out this time. They took her away. He stood there alone, covered in dirt, his hands bleeding, his heart still racing. The woods were quiet again, as if nothing had happened. He walked home slowly that night. His clothes were ruined. His body hurt. But his mind hurt more. When he reached his house, he washed his hands and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. He did not sleep much that night. He did not know who the woman was. He did not know why she was buried. All he knew was that if he had walked past that spot, if he had ignored that sound, a life would have ended alone in the dark. And that thought stayed with him as the night slowly faded into morning. The next morning, he woke up to the sunlight, filtering weakly through the thin curtains. His hands still hurt from the digging, and tiny cuts on his fingers ached when he moved them. He sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about the woman he had saved. Her eyes haunted him, the fear, the gratitude, the trust she had shown him in those few moments. He tried to continue his normal routine, but everything felt heavier. Every sound, every shadow reminded him of the woods, of that buried voice calling for help. At work, he went through the motions, folding boxes, lifting supplies, moving slowly but carefully. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the scene over and over. He thought about what could have happened if he had ignored the sound. His heart ached at the thought of leaving someone to die in silence. He had never imagined himself in such a situation. He had never thought that someone would be depending on him for their life. Meanwhile, the woman he had saved was in a hospital. The medical team had done everything to stabilize her. She had fainted a few times during the night and had been given fluids and warmth to recover. Slowly, she began to regain her strength, though she remained weak and pale. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Word of the rescue had spread quickly through the local community. People who lived nearby were talking about the man who had saved a life in the woods. The police had contacted him for a statement. They asked him to describe what he had seen, what he had done, and how he had managed to dig her out so quickly. He spoke simply and honestly, giving every detail he remembered. He didn't mention that he had worried about his own safety. He didn't mention the fear that had pressed down on him like a heavy weight. For him, it had never been about heroism. It had been about not letting someone die when he could do something. A few days later, he received a call from the hospital. The woman wanted to meet him in person. He felt a mixture of fear and curiosity. He had saved a stranger, and now that stranger wanted to see him. He agreed, and arrangements were made. When he arrived at the hospital, he found her sitting in a chair, wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked frail, but there was something about her that seemed different from anyone he had ever seen. She was well dressed, even in the hospital clothes, and there was a quiet strength in her eyes, despite the recent trauma. She looked at him carefully, as if trying to place every detail of his face in her memory. She smiled faintly, and he felt a strange warmth, a sense of connection that he could not explain. "I can't thank you enough," she said softly. Her voice was weak, but every word was filled with meaning. "You saved my life. I don't know how I can ever repay you." He shook his head, feeling awkward. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." She studied him silently for a moment. "Not anyone would have stopped and helped," she said. "You risked yourself. That means more than you know." The conversation felt strange to him. He was not used to being praised. He was not used to people noticing him for more than his work or the way he quietly raised his child. He had lived a life of simplicity and struggle, unnoticed, and now he felt seen in a way that was both thrilling and uncomfortable. Over the next few days, he kept in touch with the hospital, checking on her progress. She was recovering steadily, though she still needed rest. Every time he spoke with her, there was a careful, unspoken understanding. He realized that the moments in the woods had created a bond that could not be explained by words alone. During one visit, she leaned closer and whispered, almost hesitantly, "While I was trapped, I thought I would never see the sky again. I thought I would never breathe fresh air, never hear a kind voice. You were the first sign that someone cared, that someone could reach me, even when I felt completely alone." He listened silently, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that the life he had saved was not just a stranger, not just someone in trouble. She had felt complete despair, and he had been her only hope. That thought stayed with him, pressing into his mind and heart. The hospital staff continued their care, but she was determined to leave as soon as she could. Her life was not meant to be paused, and she had responsibilities waiting for her. Yet she insisted on speaking with him privately before going home. When that moment came, they sat in a quiet room. She held his gaze and spoke softly. "I don't know why I was saved," she admitted, "but I know I was. And I will never forget the person who made that happen." He nodded, unsure what to say. There were no words to describe what he had done or why. He only knew that he could not have turned away. Days passed, and life began to move forward again. He returned to work, walked the woods for solace, and took care of his child. Yet something had changed. He felt a new sense of awareness, a deeper understanding of the fragility of life. The world seemed different. Shadows seemed darker, but the light seemed brighter. Moments felt heavier with meaning. Meanwhile, the woman began to rebuild her life. She took her time to recover fully, but she never forgot the man who had saved her. The memory of his hands, his voice, his determination stayed with her. She wanted to meet him again, to express something she could not say over the phone, to explain why the act had mattered so profoundly. One evening, he walked through the woods, as he often did. The trees whispered in the wind, and he thought about the buried cries and the strange connection that had formed in those terrifying moments. He wondered if he would ever see her again, if he would ever understand why life had placed him in that moment at that time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the path. He felt a sense of calm and unease mixed together. Life had always been predictable in its unpredictability, and yet nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing could prepare him for the feeling of having changed someone's destiny without even knowing it. He returned home, held his child close, and whispered stories of bravery and hope. Even in the quiet, he felt the echo of the woods, of the voice that had cried for help, and the gratitude that had been passed between them. He realized that even ordinary people could touch extraordinary lives. That courage was not in grand gestures, but in small, immediate actions. And though he did not know it yet, this encounter would follow him for the rest of his life. It would shape his understanding of kindness, responsibility, and human connection in ways he had never imagined. The rescue had ended, but the story of its impact was only beginning. Weeks passed after the rescue, but the memory of that night stayed with him like a shadow he could not shake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, her pale skin, the fear in her eyes, and the desperate voice calling for help. It was not just an image. It was a feeling that stayed in his chest, heavy and real. Life continued around him. He went to work, picked up his child from school, helped with homework, and prepared simple dinners. But everything felt slightly different. The woods no longer felt like a quiet place of solitude. Instead, they reminded him of the fragile line between life and death, of how quickly everything could change. Then, one morning, he saw her name in the local news. She had survived an attempt on her life. The headline called her a wealthy businesswoman, a figure well known for her charity work and public life. He stared at the screen, stunned. The woman he had pulled from the ground was not just any stranger. She was someone who had power, influence, and money. Yet, when he had saved her, she was nothing but a terrified human being, buried in the dirt and gasping for life. He felt a strange mix of emotions: pride, relief, and something else he could not name. He realized that in those woods, status did not matter. Her wealth did not save her. Her courage did not save her. He had been the one who made the difference with nothing but his hands and his heart. A few days later, he was contacted by the police. They asked him to come in for a statement and to help identify the kidnappers. He agreed, wanting to make sure she was safe and that the people who did this would be caught. At the station, he gave a clear account of the night, of the digging, and of her condition. The officers nodded with respect, calling him a hero. He shrugged, uncomfortable with praise, and focused only on helping in any way he could. Meanwhile, she was recovering at home. She had been released from the hospital, but still needed rest and quiet. Her family and staff were around, but she asked repeatedly about him. She wanted to meet him again, not for publicity, but because she felt that connection, the bond formed in those dark, desperate moments. Finally, a meeting was arranged at her home. When he arrived, he was taken to a quiet room. She was seated, looking calm but alert. Her eyes met his, and the recognition was immediate. She smiled faintly, and he felt a strange warmth, a sense of relief that she was truly safe. "I've been thinking about that night a lot," she said softly. "I don't know why it happened, why I was saved, but I remember every second. I remember your hands, your voice, the way you refused to leave me there." He nodded, unsure what to say. Words felt small compared to what had happened. I did what I had to do. I couldn't leave you there," he said simply. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You may not realize it, but that act changed everything. I was ready to give up, to accept that I would die alone in the dark. And then you came. You gave me hope. You gave me life." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words. She did not speak of money or fame. She spoke of life, of hope, and of trust. And in that moment, he understood that what he had done was far bigger than he had thought. It was not about being a hero. It was about being human. Over the next few days, they talked more. She wanted to know about his life, his child, his work. He answered cautiously, not used to opening up to strangers, but there was a trust there that he could not deny. He realized that in some ways, their worlds had collided, and that collision had created a bond stronger than either of them expected. He also learned more about what had happened to her. The police had discovered that the kidnapping was planned, a desperate attempt by unknown criminals to take advantage of her fortune. She had been trapped, buried alive, while they waited for ransom. The details were horrifying, but she spoke of them calmly, focusing on survival and gratitude rather than fear. One afternoon, as he helped her into a chair, she leaned closer and whispered something that stopped him cold. "While I was buried, I overheard them talking. They knew about you and your child. They were watching more than me. They were watching everything. I don't know why, but somehow your life was connected to this. And you were the one who saved me." His heart raced. The idea that his simple, unnoticed life could be linked to something so dangerous was overwhelming. Fear and confusion mixed with relief. He realized that the world was bigger and stranger than he had imagined, and that ordinary people could suddenly become part of extraordinary events. She looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," she said. "Not with money or gifts. Only by telling the truth and making sure you are safe." He shook his head, trying to process everything. Safety, repayment, connection. It was all overwhelming. He had always believed that life was simple, that if you worked hard and cared for those around you, it would be enough. Now he realized that life was unpredictable, and sometimes the smallest actions could create ripples that changed everything. In the weeks that followed, he continued his routine, but with a new awareness. He walked the woods more carefully, always alert. He watched his child with more attention, realizing how fragile and precious life could be. Every meal, every moment, felt heavier with meaning. She began to recover fully, returning to her life with a renewed sense of purpose. Yet she never forgot him. The memory of his hands pulling her from the dirt, his voice calming her fear, and the courage he had shown stayed with her every day. She wanted to see him again, not for gratitude, but to acknowledge the bond that had formed under unimaginable circumstances. One evening, he returned to the woods, walking the familiar path slowly. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. He thought about that night, about how quickly life could change, and how one act of courage could save someone and alter the course of their world. He remembered her voice, weak and trembling, calling for help. He remembered the feeling of dirt under his fingernails, the ache in his arms, and the rush of fear that had driven him to act. And he remembered the moment he finally pulled her out, when life returned to her in a single heartbeat. As he walked, he realized that this story was not just hers or his. It was about the connection between people, the trust we can place in strangers, and the courage that can appear in the most ordinary hearts. And he knew deep down that his life and hers would never be the same again. Weeks passed, and life seemed to settle into a fragile normal. The woman was recovering, and the police were following leads to capture those responsible for her kidnapping. Yet both of them knew that the incident had left an invisible mark, one that could not be erased. One afternoon, she invited him to her office. She wanted to discuss something important, something private. He agreed, curious and cautious. When he arrived, he was led to a quiet room away from staff and cameras. The atmosphere was calm, but charged with anticipation. She looked at him, her eyes serious, but filled with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you," she began softly. He nodded, unsure what to expect. While she spoke, she described what happened during those terrifying hours underground. She admitted that she had nearly given up hope, that the darkness had felt endless, and that she had imagined that no one would find her. But then she remembered his face, his determination, the sound of him digging and calling out to her. Those memories were vivid, and they had given her the strength to keep going. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was almost a whisper. While I was buried, I overheard something. My kidnappers were talking, and they mentioned your name. Not mine, yours. And they spoke about your child. I don't understand why they would, but somehow you are part of this. And I knew that if anyone could survive, it would be because of you. His stomach tightened. The thought that he and his child had been unknowingly part of a dangerous situation made his head spin. Fear mixed with confusion. He had never imagined that his quiet life, the one spent working hard and caring for his child, could intersect with someone else's peril in this way. I don't know how to explain it, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. But when I heard them mention you, I understood something. You are not an ordinary man. You have strength in ways you don't realize. Courage in ways that matter more than you know. And you saved me because of it. He shook his head, still trying to process the revelation. He was used to thinking of himself as just a man doing his best to survive and care for his child. He had never considered that anyone might see him differently, that his actions could carry significance beyond the moment. You saved me with your hands, your heart, and your courage, she whispered. And you didn't even know it. The weight of her words settled on him. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the enormity of what had happened. He realized that heroism was not about recognition or reward. It was about the choices made when no one was watching, when every second counted, and when failure was not an option. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thought. The room seemed to hold the echoes of the woods, of the soil, and of the voice that had called for help. It was a quiet reminder of how quickly life could change, and how one moment could define the future. She spoke again, her tone calmer now but still earnest. I don't want to ask anything of you. I just want you to understand that what you did mattered. You saved more than a life. You saved hope. You reminded me that even in the darkest moments, someone can show up and make a difference. He felt a mix of humility and pride. He had never sought praise, and yet the gratitude in her eyes, the sincerity in her voice, left him speechless. He realized that sometimes words were not enough, that some things were meant to be felt rather than explained. Over the next few days, they continued to communicate, carefully and respectfully. She wanted to ensure that he and his child were safe. She insisted on personally helping with anything he might need, not as a payment, but as a way to acknowledge the bond formed in those terrifying hours. He found himself thinking about her often, not just about the incident, but about the way she spoke, the way she expressed emotion, and the way she had trusted him in a moment when trust seemed impossible. There was a depth to her that went beyond wealth or status, a humanity that matched his own, and it drew him in. He walked through the woods, the same path where it all began. The sun was setting, casting long shadows, and the air was cool and quiet. He remembered the panic, the fear, and the determination he had felt while digging her out. He remembered the relief when she emerged from the soil, breathing, alive, and clutching his hand. He realized that the woods had changed for him. They were no longer just a place for quiet reflection. They were a place of memory, of courage, and of life saved. Every step reminded him that ordinary people could face extraordinary circumstances and emerge with lessons and connections that lasted a lifetime. Later that night, he sat at the kitchen table, his child asleep in the next room. He thought about the strange connection between his simple life and the extraordinary events that had unfolded. He understood that life could place people in impossible situations, but it also allowed acts of bravery to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. He knew that the story was not over. The woman would continue her life, but the bond they shared, forged in fear and courage, would remain. And he, too, would continue his life, but with a deeper awareness of the fragility of existence, the power of human connection, and the unexpected ways that courage could define a person's destiny. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between their separate lives, they both knew that the events in the woods had changed everything. The fear had passed, but the gratitude, the connection, and the understanding of what it truly meant to save a life lingered, a quiet, unshakable truth that would guide them both for years to come. Months had passed since the terrifying night in the woods, but the memory of that moment remained vivid in his mind. The woman he had saved had returned to her life, and he had returned to his own. Yet both of them knew that their lives had changed in ways that could never be reversed. The police had continued their investigation. The kidnappers were caught, and the authorities confirmed that the woman's wealth had indeed made her a target. But the details that came out shocked him. The criminals had followed her carefully, planning the crime for weeks, and they had somehow discovered information about his life as well. It was frightening to think that his ordinary existence had been noticed and somehow entangled with hers. Despite the danger that had once brushed against him, he did not let fear dominate his life. He continued his routine, but with a heightened awareness. He watched his surroundings more carefully, and he was more protective of his child. He walked through the woods less for solitude and more for vigilance, checking every sound, every movement. Life was fragile, and he had seen how quickly it could be threatened. She, on the other hand, had been deeply affected by what had happened. Her recovery had taken longer than anyone expected, not just physically, but emotionally. The memory of being trapped underground, of facing the possibility of death, lingered in her mind. Yet she also carried the memory of his hands pulling her out, the way he had refused to leave her, and the courage he had shown. That memory had become a source of strength for her. One afternoon, she invited him to her office once more. She wanted to speak to him, alone, about something important. When he arrived, she greeted him quietly, her eyes holding a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. They sat across from each other, the silence filled with understanding and tension. "I've thought about that night every day," she began. "I know I owe you my life, and no words can express how much that means to me. But it's more than that. You saved me, yes, but you also showed me what courage really looks like. You didn't act because of fame, money, or recognition. You acted because it was the right thing to do. That is something rare, something that touches the heart in ways I can't explain." He listened quietly, feeling a warmth he had never felt before. He had never expected to be praised or admired. He had only acted out of instinct, out of the need to help someone in desperate danger. Yet her words moved him profoundly. "I want you to know," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "that what you did has changed my life. It reminded me of hope, of humanity, and of the truth that ordinary people can be extraordinary. You are extraordinary, and you may not even realize it." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had always thought of himself as simple, unremarkable. Yet here was a person whose life he had saved, someone whose words carried the kind of meaning he had never experienced. He realized that heroism was not about grand gestures or fame. It was about doing the right thing when it mattered most. Over the following weeks, they spoke more often, carefully and respectfully. She checked on him and his child, ensuring their safety and well-being. He appreciated the gestures, but he remained modest, insisting that he had only done what any parent would do in a similar situation. Still, their bond deepened. It was not about romance or friendship alone. It was about a connection forged in the crucible of fear and trust. It was about two people who had faced life and death together, and who now shared an understanding that went beyond words. One day, as he walked through the woods with his child, he paused to look at the place where he had dug her out of the soil. The sun was low, casting long shadows, and the air was filled with the quiet sounds of nature. He remembered the panic, the fear, and the desperate cries for help. He remembered the relief, the gratitude, and the bond that had formed in those moments. He realized that the woods had become a symbol for him. They represented courage, connection, and the fragile nature of life. Every step he took reminded him of the night he had acted without hesitation, of the life he had saved, and of the invisible threads that connected human beings. That evening, he sat at home, watching his child sleep peacefully. He thought about the woman, about her whispered words, and about the ways their lives had intersected. He understood that their story was not just about fear or danger. It was about trust, humanity, and the courage to act when no one else could. It was about the extraordinary in the ordinary. The woman, too, reflected on the events of that night. She had returned to her work, to her commitments, and to her life in the public eye. But she never forgot him. His actions, his courage, and his humanity stayed with her. She often thought about the quiet man who had risked everything without knowing the full consequences, and she felt a deep, enduring gratitude. In time, both of them returned to their daily routines. The danger had passed, the criminals were caught, and the immediate threat had faded. But the experience had left a permanent mark. He had learned the depth of his own courage and the power of small, decisive actions. She had learned the value of trust and the profound impact of a single act of bravery. Though life moved forward, the memory of that night remained. It was a story they could not forget, a moment that shaped their understanding of life and humanity. The woods, the soil, the desperate cries, and the whispered words became a shared history, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and humanity could shine through. And so, he continued to live his quiet, ordinary life with his child, stronger and more aware than before. She continued her life, carrying the memory of his courage and the bond they had shared. The story of that night, of fear and bravery, of desperation and trust, would remain with them both, a silent testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary people when faced with impossible circumstances.